I've covered news events in Conway for almost 20 years. In that time, I've seen the city go through a lot of change. Like every thriving city, Conway has its share of growing pains. That's what this show is about. We tackle the issues that are important to the people of Conway. I tell my journalism students there are at least two sides to every story. My goal is to find the common ground. Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of Common Ground. We're stepping out of Conway, Arkansas and moving halfway around the world over to Pakistan, to that area. Our guest today is Alan Eastham, who's on the faculty at Hendrix, former U.S. ambassador, served in Pakistan, India, Africa, other places. I'm not going to go through your full bio. We don't have time for that. But first of all, thank you very much for being here.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here.
And as I said, you're on the faculty at Hendrix, teaching international relations in that area. And so, in light of the news in the last couple of weeks out of Pakistan, the death of bin Laden, that's why I asked you to be here today. And I just wanted to start with, how is the relationship between the governments of the United States and Pakistan? Even before bin Laden's death and now a couple of weeks after.
Well, David, I think there's certainly been a lot of ferment in the discussion in public about the relationship over the past week, not quite a week, since Osama bin Laden was killed. There is a long history between Pakistan and the United States, and it's been one that I would describe as running in cycles. Pakistan was a close ally during the Cold War, during the period when we pursued a policy of containment toward the Soviet Union. One of the most notable events of that period was the famous U-2 flight in 1960, when Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union. That plane took off from Pakistan. Pakistan was that kind of an ally. Then containment went by and détente began, and we sort of slipped away to the side from Pakistan. Pakistan began pursuing a nuclear program, which was something that we didn't like very much, was their single-minded pursuit of nuclear weapons through the 1970s. In 1979, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, we were again close partners with Pakistan in order to combat the Soviet presence in Afghanistan. Soviets left Afghanistan in the early 1990s, and our partnership went stale again, largely over the nuclear program. Then, after September 11th, Pakistan became a key ally in the war on terror and has provided considerable support, and both material, moral, and in terms of Pakistani lives, to the U.S. effort to corral or destroy, disable, and demolish, or whatever the 3 Ds are, the network that includes Al-Qaeda. Now, with the death of bin Laden, I suspect that there'll be a re-intensified reassessment, an assessment of the relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan. I suspect that there's a difference between the attitude, between the perception of the relationship as it is seen in public these days and as it is conducted within the government. I have no inside knowledge on this.
So do you think it's more tense than what the public perceives?
No, I would say it's probably less tense.
Okay.
There are probably differing opinions. Probably, I say, because I'm entirely speculating here. It's probably less intense with differing opinions within the government, as you see outside of government. We have to do business with Pakistan. Pakistan, our relationship with Pakistan is not just about Osama bin Laden. It's also about logistical support for the U.S. forces that are in Afghanistan. It's about trying to structure the regional geopolitics, if you will, in a way that reduces tension and that causes a productive series of productive relationships amongst the countries of the region, including India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, as well as Iran in that. And it's not just about bin Laden. There are some serious issues that exist to be solved within the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, quite apart from the terrorism.
Well, you mentioned the relationship behind the scenes may be different than what the public perceives. It was a London newspaper reported that that the U.S. and Pakistan may have had an agreement that allowed the U.S. to carry out covert operations, such as resulted in the death of bin Laden. And what Pakistan got from that is the ability to criticize the U.S. afterwards. And the Pakistani government has denied this. Do you think there's even a possibility that could have been the scenario?
Well, yeah, it is. It is entirely possible that in some of the I saw the report you're talking about, but within some of the conversations that were held, intense conversations held between the U.S. government and the Pakistan government during the period immediately after 9/11, that the prospect of U.S. direct action of the form that was taken in Abbottabad last week might have been contemplated, and we might very well have gotten a nod and a wink. Again, I have no knowledge. But a lot of time has passed since then, and the government of Pakistan has changed
since 2001.
Yeah, both our governments have changed. George Bush is no longer there. President Musharraf is no longer there. You have a new dispensation in the United States with President Obama. You have a new dispensation in Pakistan with President Zardari and the government in place there. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if private commitments made privately between heads of state existed, but had not been formalized in any way. I mean, what sort of I can think of a lot of
what sort of handshake that took place at some point.
Exactly, and I can think of a million reasons not to write that down.
Right.
Okay.
So, just looking at from your perspective,
it really doesn't matter very much, though, David.
Okay.
It doesn't matter very much whether there was an agreement or not. Very clear, the United States was going to do this. It would have been better had we had enough confidence in our Pakistani partner to be able to conduct it with the full knowledge and approval and participation of the Pakistanis. But I think the fact that we didn't is a reflection of the importance the administration put on it on this side.
Does it also
very important not to go wrong on this one?
Does it also reflect to the confidence of the U.S. administration and the Pakistani government? Which gets to questions been asked a thousand times.
Oh,
Did the Pakistani government know bin Laden was there?
I think there is a very big question of the degree of trust. And the Pakistanis have recognized that. They have recognized very clearly that had there been the level of trust that both of us would like, obviously, it would have been a joint operation. We've done things like this together before, not quite of this magnitude, but things that are quite similar. And I mentioned the U-2 flight, for example. We used a Pakistani airbase to send U-2s over the Soviet Union. Khrushchev confronted the then leader of Pakistan with a map with a red mark on Peshawar and said, "This is on our target list." The Pakistanis have been our partners in stuff before. I hope that both sides will use the illustrative feature of lack of trust as a part of thinking about where we go from now on.
So, and again, speculation on your part, did the Pakistanis know bin Laden was there?
Well, I have a personal point of view on this. That's the only point of view I have. I don't have anybody else's. But it, to my mind, is inconceivable that his presence, or at least the presence of someone like him, was unknown. I think it has to be the case that a compound of that magnitude in that particular place could not possibly have escaped the notice of officials in Pakistan. Whether they knew it was bin Laden, no, he had a front man, a Pakistani, who had bought the property, who was a tribal, bound by the code of the Pathans, in which you don't ever see the family. It would be very normal to be cloistered and enclosed, for the family to be behind a big wall and never come out. That's quite normal in the Pashtun culture of the man who was the ostensible owner of the place. And but it seems inconceivable to me that they wouldn't have known there were some Arabs back there, that something was
something
not right.
fishy.
Yeah. Whether they knew it was bin Laden, I don't know about that. But
does it surprise you that bin Laden was found in Pakistan?
No. No, not at all. The main belief ever since he fled from Tora Bora nearly 10 years ago was that he was in Pakistan. They thought he was in Waziristan. And note that the man who rented the house was a wazir from Waziristan. So there was probably some truth to the original stories of where he was in the tribal area. And he took shelter, and then he moved. Moved to a place that was less likely to be subject of a drone attack, for example, or where he would be more able to, as the phrase goes, hide in plain sight.
You mentioned drone attacks. That's something that has continued in Pakistan by U.S. forces. Is this something that will have, and attacking whether militants or insurgents or whatever who they see trying to help in Afghanistan, are these attacks going to further help or hinder U.S.-Pakistani relations in any way?
Well, they're the subject of quite a bit of debate in Pakistan amongst Pakistanis. And I think there's a widespread belief in Pakistan that the United States is only engaged in killing Pakistani civilians with these attacks from the air. I think there's a difference there's a severe disadvantage in the public perception of the United States because of the drone attacks that are conducted on the Pakistani side of the Durand line, on the side of their border. However, the plain fact is they work, and I don't see their use dropping in any perceptible way for a while. I have to say I have some serious qualms about drone attacks as a method of combat. I've been uneasy about them for the last 10 years.
Not precise enough, for lack of a better term, or
too reliant on intelligence, which can be right or wrong. The concept of actionable intelligence is one that perhaps it's developed over the years, but I just am just uncomfortable with the idea that some fellow controlling an aircraft from 10,000 miles away in the system that exists, as I've seen it described in the press, can conduct a lethal attack in a precise enough manner to meet the sort of moral stringency that should be the case when you're doing something that kills people.
All right, well, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back with another segment of Common Ground. Welcome back to Common Ground, talking with Alan Eastham on the Hendrix faculty, but also a former State Department diplomat working in Pakistan, India, Africa, various places around the world, talking about the death of bin Laden. That's where we're going to get into next. Is what effect will bin Laden's death have on Al Qaeda?
Well, that's a big question. I've seen in the press some discussion of unhappiness within Al Qaeda about the deputy who's been with bin Laden for many years, whether he would be acceptable to the membership, if you can call it that, to the network that is Al Qaeda. to take on the leadership. He is certainly described as much less charismatic and much more dogmatic than Osama bin Laden, and that may not be the way it comes out. I can see a period of some uncertainty ahead about what Al-Qaeda is.
Do you see a power struggle of any kind then among maybe several deputies?
No, I think my guess would be that the confederation that is Al-Qaeda will likely transform itself in some way. One thing you can be certain of is that the what shall I call it? I don't want to call it a movement, but the point of view, the ideology that drove bin Laden is not going to go away. I've found in my career and in my life that one of the most difficult things in the world is to negotiate anything with people who believe that their way is right because God ordained it. We all believe that to some extent. But in the Western tradition, that mostly applies to your own life and to your own ethical and moral standards. Whereas in Islam, there is not and particularly in the Salafist movement that is represented in part by bin Laden and his associates, that division between your personal life and your public and political life does not exist. And so that leads to phenomena resembling the Taliban, who imposed a rather strange and unique moral code on Afghanistan when they were in charge. Bin Laden is not far away ideologically from the Taliban. In fact, the Taliban were a laboratory for trying to put this ideology into effect. And the ideology of using violence to impose it, violence to bring down those who are perceived to be the enemy of that ideology, that would be the United States of America and Europe, that's not going to go away either. So I think you'll see a transformation of some sort. You may not have a charismatic figure.
But some of the documents that have been reported that they found in this compound at least seem to indicate that bin Laden was, he was very much focused on large-scale attacks against the United States, but there were others within Al-Qaeda and some of the splinter groups around that were more interested in, shall we say, regional or localized terrorism where they lived, as opposed to worrying about the United States.
That's right.
So, was bin Laden still effectively the leader? Was he in charge? Had he become any type of a figurehead of Al-Qaeda?
I can't answer that based on what I've read about the documents. I mean, bin Laden clearly had this fixation on the United States. His philosophy was that Islamic government of a particular kind should be established everywhere, and that it's universal. That was his belief. It was almost a tactical question whether you focused on what he called the near target, which is an individual government in the Islamic region. He started out in his ideology with a narrow objective of overturning the Al Saud family in Saudi Arabia. That was his narrow target. Then when he came to the conclusion that the United States was protecting the Al Sauds, he switched to what he called the far target, which was the United States, and that took us on the road through the East Africa bombings, the bombing of the Cole, and culminating in 9/11 and the events that have taken place since then. There may very well be a change if you in orientation. It'd be a more complicated question for the United States if the governments of each individual country in the Middle East came under attack by these ideologues, the people who follow this ideology. Be a much more complex question then.
Because some of these documents seem to indicate that the group, the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, was particularly interested in the Arabian Peninsula.
Exactly.
And so that's the type of problems that it could occur.
Yeah.
So is the world safer now?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Without bin Laden there, it's still a pretty dangerous place.
Mm-hmm.
But the removal of Osama bin Laden there are considerable benefits to it. One, it removes that symbol. There are some downsides too. I can think of a couple with that. It is a demonstration of American will, persistence, staying power, American power, if you will, which we still all ought to believe is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Although I find a lot of my students don't share that view, unfortunately, but the world is definitely safer, and we feel a little better too. We feel particularly a little bit safer. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean we should let things slip. Mm-hmm. We should let things slip when they slip, when it's time, and I think it's way too early to say.
Okay. So what does this mean for the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan?
I suspect that's going to be a debate that you'll see probably will play out in the context of the budget discussion.
Mm-hmm. Because there already has been discussion of a drawdown.
Yep, and
probably this summer.
And the president made that there will be a drawdown starting mm-hmm. in July. The question mm-hmm. is how much, how fast. The president announced a year ago that there was that they would start coming out this summer, and you will see them. You will see some of them march out. It will happen, but the slightly longer term is what I would be fretful about, because we simply can't take the removal of Osama bin Laden from this earth as a justification for giving up on what we have been trying to achieve in Afghanistan, however distant it might be from the reasons that were cited when we went into Afghanistan in the first place. Mm-hmm. Now, they laughed about the pottery barn policy. If you break it, it's yours. Mm-hmm. But I think we do bear some responsibility to leave Afghanistan at least in better shape than we found it. Mm-hmm. And what I would worry about is a rush to the exit, mm-hmm. based on the idea that Osama bin Laden's death represents the removal of the threat.
Okay, so is Afghanistan better off now than it was in 2001 when U.S. troops invaded?
Absolutely. The Afghanistan of 2001 was run by the Taliban, mm-hmm. and I actually, when I was in active service, I used to go to Afghanistan under the Taliban, and there's no question that Afghanistan is better off now. There's less repression of women, there's more education, the roads have been fixed, a lot of them. There is more violence because of paradoxically, the presence of U.S. forces attracts violence. Mm-hmm. Begets violence too, because we're fighting a war. But mm-hmm. I think that many Afghans are much better off, much freer mm-hmm. than they were in October of 2001 when we initially went into Afghanistan.
Is the country stable enough to keep the Taliban at bay when the U.S.
Well,
leaves?
if I read the papers correctly, that's not the strategy. The underlying premise that they seem to be working with in Washington these days is that the Taliban should be brought into government in some way. Mm-hmm. And I have a point of view on that. I have a personal point of view, mm-hmm. which is quite contrary to that of the administration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Well, we're going to have to take another break now, but we'll be back and we'll wrap up this edition of Common Ground. Welcome back to Common Ground, wrapping up this edition with Alan Eastham, Hendrix faculty member, former U.S. diplomat. Wanted to move away from Afghanistan, Pakistan, into Middle East, Northern Africa, where there have been public uprisings against government, repressive governments. Looking at it from the standpoint of terror operations, Al-Qaeda or whatever, are these uprisings a good thing or a bad thing? Will they weaken the terror operations?
In part, this is the complexity that I referred to in the last segment. It plays out in different ways. I mean, there's clearly, if you recall, when the protests were pushing President Mubarak out in Egypt, there was a great deal of public commentary about the role of the Muslim Brotherhood as a political organization, and as pretty much the only political organization that had some substance, had some organization within Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood, I hate to tell you, are an offshoot of exactly the same tendencies and ideology that produced bin Laden. Mm-hmm. They may be the Gideon's version of it, the sort of evangelical and not violent leg of it, but their ideology is quite resonant of that which is the basis of the radical ideology of Osama bin Laden. So there's reason to be worried. The question is whether they can follow a civilian political process, and we'll see. Mm-hmm. The other countries have all got really different points of view. I think that my former colleagues who are now running the Bureau of Near East Affairs in the State Department are probably running themselves ragged, trying to keep up with the nuance on all these, because Yemen is different from Bahrain, is different from Syria, is different from Tunisia, is way different from Libya. Mm-hmm. And the only two that have really played themselves out so far are Tunisia and Egypt. Mm-hmm. And so you've got a lot of other situations. The Gulf is not North Africa. They're very different. The North African countries had colonial histories that emphasized a certain amount of democracy, and the language of democracy is there. Whereas in the Emirates and the Persian Gulf, that language is not there. The discourse on democracy is not around. What you get is the traditional royalty, the emirate thing.
The White House has made some statements about the movements that we're seeing in these areas. Call it political protest as opposed to terrorism. Is saying, well, this I guess maybe it's a hope. Potential terrorists will say these political protests, to a degree anyway, they've worked in some places, as you said, to a degree in Egypt and Tunisia, even though we have different dynamics in other places. Could old school political protest replace terrorism as a method of change?
Well, you'd hope so. That should be our objective.
We would hope, yeah.
Because there ought to be a peaceful political process. I mean, that's really the only way to do it.
Right. And not that there hasn't been violence in these
but it's
situations.
Not in the form of terrorism. There was mob action, public protest, in a crowd protest, and that sort of thing. And so and that you'll notice that's much smoother than when it goes to violence, as was the case and still is the case in Libya.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, that's all the time that we have. Alan Eastham, thank you very much.
You're very welcome
for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me over.
And thanks to you for watching as well. We always love to hear from you. If you have ideas or comments, you can send us an email at commonground@conwaycorp.com or leave us a message on our Facebook page. Until next time, thanks again, and good night.